Alright, time to actually do this. So in the last video, or at the very least the last video where I actually discussed this, we covered two major points. The first was that formal logic trumps everything, so if you want to be right all the time, take a hard stance and following the rules of argumentation and formal logic, and bam, every argument you're ever in, you will win. Unless it's about subjective matters, but then all you have to do is not be a dick and you'll always win anyways. Because it's about having a civil discussion. And the second is that stupid is universal. I know this is going to sound redundant, but a stupid feminist and a stupid misogynist are both related by how stupid they are. I shouldn't have to say that, but it never fails to come up, and even if you are on the correct side of a dispute, you can still sound dumber than a bag of bricks. Anita is so often wrong and so incompetently wrong that you can't be incorrect when rebuking her. But people so often screw up that just because they're bigoted and unable to point at a pile of shit and call it as such. Case in point, the conspiracy. When your best argument for journalistic corruption is a short-time relationship could have potential conflict of interest in the future, Zoe committing an extremely redefined version of rape while still holding on to the connotations of the traditional definition, and the absolutely no amount of publicity that her game got while sleeping around, you have a very shitty argument. This repeats infinitely, so I'm just going to ignore those retarded arguments and put forth mine. But you can guess what? Anita don't know nothing about no formal logic. So the big points we have to cover before we go through this bit by bit. So first I'm going to only cover a few videos at a time, so this will be covering the Damsel in Distress videos along with the Miss Mail video, so we'll have to talk about what the Damsel in Distress even is. The fact that Anita and her partner are a duo of retardation and intellectual dishonesty, how they have no clue what is sexist or racist, and last, these people are not gamers. Now I'm going to leave that for when it comes up, but know that that has nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman or that she says some dumb shit, because a lot of gamers say some pretty dumb shit all the time. Final Fantasy Spiritual is not a Final Fantasy movie. Excuse me. Sexism has a quirk in its formal definition that creates some ambiguity. So stereotyping is a very neutral word that can have both negative and positive connotations, and this conflicts with the connotation of sexism pretty heavily, as I'm assuming most rational human beings think sexism isn't all that great. So I'd like to reimagine sexism as any perception, philosophy, or action that negatively views or impacts someone or a group of people solely because of their sex. I feel like this is appropriate and gets around the contextualized meaning and the formal definition disparity, so I like it. And either of those definitions can work, but I'm guessing not for Anita. Now this is speculation because I would never say she was on purpose misusing the term in order to make a career out of being a victim, but she calls things or alludes to things being sexist while they affect both sexes equally. This brings us to the damsel in distress. It's kidnapping a woman and someone, normally a male, coming to her rescue. That's it. Kidnapping affects both sexes in pretty much the exact same way, and ignoring the fact that video games and movies present this unproportionately positive to the outcomes of kidnapping, which is rape, death, and enslavement, this doesn't end well very often. Last time I checked, death was the same no matter what genitalia you have, so I'm going to step out on a limb and say that the damsel in distress isn't sexist no matter how the woman is framed. But that won't stop Anita from trying to convince us that it is. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I have this sneaking suspicion that between Anita and Jonathan is the smarter one who knows how to lie in just specific ways that it seems like it was true or meaningful enough to convince people to take up arms when no such thing exists. And Anita, just from her non-scripted videos, yes, I know you can sound far less intelligent when you're not given the time to think and still be smart, you can kind of see a breakdown in her thought process, and it's saddening. And I'm guessing that you can understand why I needed to make these videos. So just know that I will be throwing a lot towards Anita, but most of my hate goes towards the liar, and I'm assuming that's Jonathan. And before you get your panties in a twist because Anita is destroying everything in gaming, know that 1, that's incorrect, and 2, I'll be coming after the people who you respect because they actually harm us and the medium, but no one gives a shit because they say the term graphical fidelity over and over again. So to start this off, in the old script I made a point about how the title was incorrect, but that was just me poking fun, but it really didn't hit as hard as saying that the very first point discredits the entire web series instantly. With her introduction to the video, she claims that the sexism expressed in video games is systematic, which is rather funny to me. She doesn't present one reasonable case of sexism in a game, and she has the goal to say that the system is inherently sexist. I mean, it is, and you will see that once you look at the employment rates between women in the AAA industry and women in the independent market, but guess who doesn't even mention that? So if you wanted me to take you seriously, you have started on the wrong foot.
The tale of how Crystal went from protagonist of her own epic adventure to the passive victim in someone else's game illustrates how the damsel in distress trope disempowers female characters and robs them of the chance to be heroes in their own right.
See, you were making a decent point, albeit a hopeless, unnecessary point, but then, bam, sexist. This is the problem I have with this video series. Whenever she makes a good point, and there are a few times in which she makes a logical point, they ruin it by attributing it to sexism in the most ass-backwards way possible. She implies that because Star Fox stole Crystal's thunder and she was made the damsel in distress, that is why all damsels in all video games are being disempowered. So ignoring the massive leap in logic for a second, we have to remind ourselves that video games are in fact not real life, and this empowerment and disempowerment are all based off of figments of imagination. So she is right because Crystal got her ass disempowered hard as a motherfucker, but this comes with some amendums. First is that the disempowerment didn't come from becoming a damsel in distress, it came from being bumped by an icon that will bring in more money than her, and her being a damsel in distress is incidental. Second, it's a gross generalization that because this specific woman was disempowered, that all other damsels in distress are disempowered, and that is some intellectual dishonesty. And third, this is in all likelihood the only example of this happening. Now this may have happened outside of this, but the idea that a game would go through pre-production process with a female lead and then suddenly change into a male lead and then bump her to a damsel in distress seems nonsensical. Most of the time these women are created simply to be placed in these roles, so they never had the power and therefore they cannot lose the power. Unless you believe that Wreck-It Ralph is real and these characters are not the creation of artists, in which case you should get some help. They never had a chance to be the main character, or else they would have made them so. This is the main crux between Anita making a video actually discussing the trope with decently informed points, and the grasping at the sexist straws that we actually received. The damsel in distress is not inherently sexist, just inherently lazy.
The term damsel in distress is a translation of the French demoiselle en détresse. Demoiselle simply means young lady, while détresse means roughly anxiety or despair caused by a sense of abandonment, helplessness, or danger.
Did you just define damsel in distress by stating the definition of damsel and distress? That's stupid.
One way to think about damsel characters is via what's called the subject-object dichotomy. In the simplest terms, subjects act, and objects are acted upon. The subject is the protagonist, the one who the story is centered on, and the one doing most of the action. In video games, this is almost always the main playable character, and the one from whose perspective most of the story is seen. So the damsel trope typically makes men the subject of narratives, while relegating women to the role of object. This is a form of objectification because as objects, damseled women are being acted upon, most often becoming or reduced to a prize to be won, a treasure to be found, or a goal to be achieved.
Now this is rather funny to me because this could be seen as a sexist mentality and real disempowerment towards women. Ignoring the lazy slapping of a principle to something that doesn't even belong to the specific situation, real women get kidnapped. That means what you're saying is that every single woman that has ever existed has had no agency in their life, and I'm talking today and right now. Someone getting married right now is doing so not because they want to get married, but because they are the property of the man, and that bitch better get in the kitchen and make him a sandwich. Now, maybe Anita hasn't had a real relationship yet, but most of them revolve around interpersonal connections and things other than sex. This means that for the most part, it can't be objectification because you can't see them as an object. There are many exceptions to this rule, but in the idealized and romanticized world we live in, the apex of a relationship is to become so interdependent on one another that you cease to become two people and become one, and that's mentally, emotionally, sexually, and a whole host of other things. We can argue on the validity of that, but the damsel in distress trope goes hand in hand with the true love conquers all trope, and that says a lot. If you think being involved with someone like that is objectification, then you have an extremely morbid view on human relationships, and that is not right. Now, damsel in distress can be sexist, but if your mother or sister or girlfriend gets kidnapped and you want them safe, probably has nothing to do with sexism or objectification.
I've heard it said that in the game of patriarchy, women are not the opposing team, they are the ball.
Well, whoever said that is either retarded, or they've never played sports and are retarded. In every sport, the ball is nothing more than an extension of the rules. Men don't fight over the ball, they fight each other to win the game. The thing they are fighting over is the glory of the win and the reward that comes from it. And all of that is symbolized by a trophy. What makes this so bad is whoever said that line is unaware that that's the reason the colloquialism, trophy wife, exists. Because she is literally a status symbol for the man.
Even though Nintendo certainly didn't invent the damsel in distress, the popularity of their Save the Princess formula essentially set the standard for the industry. The trope quickly became the go-to motivational hook for developers, as it provided an easy way to tap into adolescent male power fantasies, in order to sell more games to young straight boys and men.
Shit, that's some aggressive speculation. Not the powerful knight saving the world and killing the demon, not the money or the power they could receive, not the respect and honor. It was rescuing women that leads to the power fantasy. It had nothing to do with the massive limitations of both disk size and hardware capabilities that meant that all games up to a certain point had little to no story in them. No, it was definitely the fact that it was the power fantasy of 12-year-olds everywhere to save a woman and get kisses. Next you're going to tell me that the power fantasy in Doom comes from finding the little dolls and fist bumping the shit out of them. Fuck yeah!
All that is really required to fulfill the damsel in distress trope is for a female character to be reduced to a state of helplessness from which she requires rescuing by a typically male hero for the benefit of his story arc.
All that is required? Yes, it is lazy and overused plot device, but that is a rather specific rule to meet. And helplessness is not a woman-only word, so thanks for the distinction.
This brings us to one of the core reasons why the trope is so problematic and pernicious for women's representations. The damsel in distress is not just a synonym for weak. Instead, it works by ripping away the power from female characters, even helpful or seemingly capable ones. No matter what we're told about their magical abilities, skills, or strengths, they're still ultimately captured or otherwise incapacitated and then must wait for rescue.
Okay, so first point, very small amount of these characters had any amount of power, so you're arguing that powerless people had their power stripped away from them. Second point, what you are arguing is the realistic portrayal of anyone, not just women, being beaten no matter how strong they are, makes women look bad when they need to be saved. See, that's the problem with saying power fantasy over and over again, is once you start complaining about realism, you start to sound like you have double standards. It's not okay for boys to view power fantasies, but it's a-okay for girls. Now, if the argument was that women should get in the fun more, I'd agree wholeheartedly because there really isn't enough female leads in gaming. But you're saying either no woman should ever get kidnapped or harmed, or if they get kidnapped and harmed, they should take care of it themselves, making it rather pointless.
The point is, they're ultimately able to gain back their own freedom. In fact, that process of overcoming the ordeal is an important step in the protagonist's transformation into a heroic figure.
Or, and this is just a slight or it's just a bit of level design. Because otherwise, no other aspect of a character development makes you a hero other than escaping jail. Which means most protagonists are not heroes even though they save hundreds of thousands of lives.
Most recently, Double Dragon Neon in 2012 reintroduced new gamers to this regressive crap yet again, this time in full HD.
So women don't get raped anymore? Because that would be pretty awesome. Oh no, you mean it's regressive because it's teaching people it's okay to hit women. By having you kill the people who batter women. So if violence against women is still a thing, and it doesn't teach people to accept violence, what are you talking about? I'm going to assume not a damn thing.
The belief that women are somehow a naturally weaker gender is a deeply ingrained socially constructed myth, which of course is completely false.
Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Women wouldn't need special rights to protect them if they were as strong or stronger than men. But they are not, and that's why rape needs to be illegal because fuck assholes. By the way, good incorrect use of the term gender. Sexual dimorphism is literally the study between the physical differences between a male and a female of any given species. Men on average are 20% larger than women, meaning if we are lazy and we don't account for a lot of factors creating a far more difference, women are on average 20% weaker than men. Now there are super strong women and really weak men, yes of course, but that does nothing but ignore the actual point being made. Men are objectively and naturally stronger than women, which of course is completely true.
But the notion is reinforced and perpetuated when women are continuously portrayed as frail, fragile, and vulnerable creatures.
No, you are implying that they are perpetuating the not myth of women being weaker than men. Shit! I'm all for fact-checking science and denying any belief that has no scientific water if it actually affects things, but this is simply not looking at other people around you and living in a bubble. Do you not understand how toxic it is to be so culturally deaf that you can say shit like this and not even flinch at the incompetence? I know it means nothing, but even Jonathan, as effeminate as that man is, might be a foot taller than you, and even if he was your size, he would have more muscle than you. Or are you going to say something as stupid as, muscle is a myth perpetuated by the patriarchy?
Now, I grew up on Nintendo. I've been a fan of the Mario and Zelda franchises for most of my life, and they'll always have a special place in my heart.
Hey, after saying some really crazy shit, here's me holding a Super Nintendo controller, just to show you that you can't get mad at me. I'm a gamer too, wink, wink. It's not like I just didn't get done calling a whole bunch of people sexist for using the damsel in distress trope and saying women are objectively weaker than men. You know, slandering a shit ton of people just now.
It'd be great to finally see Zelda, Sheik, and Tetra as the protagonists of their own games. And not just mobile DS games, I'm talking full-on console adventures.
Point number 1 for her having never played video games. She just said it would be great to see Zelda, and Zelda be the protagonists of their own games. And if you want to get real technical with me, she just said that it would be great to see Zelda and Zelda be the protagonists of their own games, and Zelda be the protagonists of their own games as well. You sure played games all your life, and definitely are a fan of Legend of Zelda. Even if it is a typo, how the hell did you miss that in editing? You talked about the very reason this is retarded earlier in the video.
And since the majority of these titles still focus on delivering crude, unsophisticated male power fantasies, developers are largely unwilling to give up the damsel in distress as an easy default motivation for their brooding male heroes or anti-heroes.
Oh, look at that tone change. I thought the damsel in distress trope was the male power fantasy. Also, you can pretend all you want, but you just put forth an incredibly subjective statement, so thanks for not even trying to argue that and pretending that your audience will just accept it.
Now and then, damseled characters may be well written, funny, dynamic, or likable.
Seeing as she is not a woman and just a child, she doesn't work for the damsel in distress trope. But that won't stop you from trying, would it?
Damsels on the more sassy end of the spectrum may struggle with their captors, or even attempt an escape on their own. But inevitably, their efforts always prove futile.
So realistic, then.
Occasionally, they may be allowed to offer the hero a last-minute helping hand, or to kick the bad guy while he's down, but these moments are largely symbolic and typically only happen after the core adventure is over, or the danger has passed.
I actually agree with this entirely.
So narratives that frame intimacy, love, or romance as something that blossoms from, or hinges upon the disempowerment and victimization of women are extremely troubling because they tend to reinforce the widespread regressive notion that women in vulnerable, passive, or subordinate positions are somehow desirable because of their powerlessness.
Yeah, not a fallacy at all. Didn't throw in a few extra things to muddy the water there, did you? Ignoring the fact that you threw submissive in there like a dick. So to sum up this point, most humans want to feel valuable. This is especially true in a relationship, and both men and women want the exact same thing, it just comes out differently. So thanks for taking a generally understood concept and twisting into, you don't need me to save you? Well, fuck you, bitch! Some men want weak women, sure, but most aren't as sick and twisted as you're making them out to be.
Unfortunately, these types of stories also help to perpetuate the paternalistic belief that power imbalances within romantic relationships are appealing, expected, or normal.
Power imbalances? Dumbass, this isn't Dragon Ball Z. Power imbalances in relationships have nothing to do with physical power. It's normally about emotional and mental control of the relationship. And if your wife gets sick and needs taken care of, that doesn't change the power at all. If anything, it might give power to the so-called person lacking the power because a normal relationship will shift to her needs over mine if he actually cares for her. So what is it, Anita? All relationships are men objectifying women, or is it that most of them are normal and at risk of becoming out of balance? If you're going to have an inept opinion on something, the least you can do is keep it consistent.
The damsel in the refrigerator is part of a larger trend of throwing women under the bus in increasingly gruesome ways, in an apparent attempt to interject what I'll loosely refer to as mature themes. Developers must be hoping that by exploiting sensationalized images of brutalized women, it'll be enough to fool gamers into thinking that their games are becoming more emotionally sophisticated.
Yeah, see, the problem with this is that men also get brutalized to such an intensity as well. But that doesn't seem to fit in your current worldview, so you won't mention it. But more importantly, this isn't sexist or even remotely harmful to women at all, even if it was just women. It's hack, lazy writing at best, but far from sexist.
But the truth is, there's nothing mature about most of these stories, and many of them cross the line into blatant misogyny.
You can't bring up anything Pseudo51 does because he's doing it on purpose. He's intentionally trying to provoke a response from you. Don't fall for the bait.
When I say violence against women, I'm primarily referring to images of women being victimized, or when violence is linked specifically to a character's gender or sexuality.
The what you are clearly not talking about is the damsel in distress trope and the woman in the fridge, as neither of these tropes involve women being attacked because they are women, or they are weak. They are literally attacked in these tropes solely because of their relationship and who their mates are. Both of these tropes wouldn't change even a little bit if the character was gay or a woman, so these tropes are not sex exclusive and therefore not sexist.
Yes, you heard that correctly. His wife is his arm. God.
So then I didn't hear that correctly, because his wife was used to make his bionic arm and not his arm because that would be retarded. And that acting job was awful. Just do a second take if it actually bothered you. You should show that it bothered you rather than kind of facepalm.
A particularly egregious example can be found in Grand Theft Auto 3, when after you've rescued Maria Latour, it's implied that the protagonist suddenly shoots her because she's talking about stereotypically girly things.
I broke a nail and my hair is ruined. I mean, can you believe it? This one cost me $50.
That shit's funny. Cheap maybe, misogynistic probably not. And it's not talking about girl stuff, it's because she's vapid. Also, that's not mercy killing trope. Did you really have to talk about this so badly that you had to force it into an inappropriate place just to make sure you mentioned it?
After being incapacitated, she begs you to kill her.
Please, Tommy, let me go.
And the player can't advance in the narrative until you shoot her in the face.
Here's why I know that's not sexist. Put a man in the same position and guess what? Nothing different happens. Sorry, I messed up big time. Looks like there won't be any more rides on the coal train. Guess you're gonna have to put me down like the dog that I am. Don't worry, buddy. I will always love you. It's the same setup, same emotional moment, same mercy killing. It could be a brother, a dad, a boyfriend, or a husband. Doesn't matter, it's the exact same. Ergo, not sexist.
They submissively accept their grisly fate and will often beg the player to perform violence on them, giving men direct and total control over whether they live or die, even saying thank you with their dying breath. In other words, these women are asking for it, quite literally.
See, I know what you're implying there, but if you take that out and only focus on what you literally said, it sounds retarded. She asked for it, literally.
These stories conjure up supernatural situations in which domestic violence perpetrated by men against women who have lost control of themselves not only appears justified, but is presented as an altruistic act done for the woman's own good.
That's pretty fucked up, Anita. The circles and flips needed to make that logical are insane. But no, having to punch women in video games is totally normalizing violence against women.
Of course, if you look at any of these games in isolation, you'll be able to find incidental narrative circumstances that can be used to explain away the inclusion of violence against women as a plot device. But just because a particular event might make sense within the internal logic of a fictional narrative, that doesn't in and of itself justify its use.
Yes, it does. First, you can't present real-world interactions when it's convenient to you and ignore it when it completely destroys your argument. And again, yes it does. Internal continuity is literally the only thing that matters, because unless you're discussing whether or not it's cheap, which should be the real argument here, it's not sexist and specific instances do require you to hit women. If a woman is running at me with a knife in her hands, I assure you she is getting her teeth kicked in. I understand the perception you're coming from being a woman and all, but that will not protect you from violence if you're also committing violence. And I hope you understand that culture isn't the same all over the world. Hell, culture can change drastically between different parts of a state, much less the large number of nations and ethnicities in the world. So either you are talking out of your ass about this culture shit, or you generally believe that your perspective is the only correct one.
Every 9 seconds, a woman is assaulted or beaten in the United States. And on average, more than 3 women are murdered by their boyfriends, husbands, or ex-partners every single day.
Oh, now I get it. Video games cause violence. Chuck up another point against intellectual dishonesty because, bitch, you lying. Now I have no clue where she got that 3 women every day are killed by their boyfriend or husband thing, but I will tell you where I get my figures from, the FBI. Now that 3 number she quoted is actually pretty good, and before you get upset with me, you have to understand that number with some added context. The FBI says that on average 14,000 people are murdered every day. That doesn't include car accidents or manslaughter, but murder. So when you factor in her little number, everything doesn't seem so bad. So if you can't figure it out, that's 0.21% of murders committed every day is a dude beating his partner to death. Again, not too shabby. But then this brings up the double standard Anita just presented. Women are in fact equal to men in every way, and that includes strength, and yet men are beating them to death.
Research consistently shows that people of all genders tend to buy into the myth that women are the ones to blame for the violence men perpetrate against them. In the same vein, abusive men consistently state that their female targets deserved it, wanted it, or were asking for it.
You got citation on that? Pretty sure you don't have any citation on that. And yeah, dudes who beat women have severe problems and they do that shit to compensate for their massive inadequacies. All you said there is that assholes say extremely assholish things. Welcome to Earth, enjoy your stay, I guess. Not sure how to rebuke that.
When violence is the primary gameplay mechanic, and therefore the primary way that the player engages with the game world, it severely limits the options for problem solving. The player is then forced to use violence to deal with almost all situations because it's the only meaningful mechanic available, even if that means beating up or killing the women they're meant to love or care about.
Really? You presented your own point against your series. These developers intentionally put these so-called scenes in their games with artistic intentions, and then you blame the violence against women on violence in the game and in a general sense. Now I know this is going down the road of violence in media creates violence in the real world in just a second, but that's only the cherry on top. Your entire incorrect argument so far is that developers put these scenes in these games because of systematic sexism and tear-jerking at the expense of women, and then you say something as stupid as they're only there because violence in general? Fuck you!
So when developers exploit sensationalized images of brutalized, mutilated, and victimized women over and over and over again, it tends to reinforce the dominant gender paradigm, which casts men as aggressive and commanding, and frames women as subordinate and dependent.
Yep, there it is. You do know that studies have been done that show video games do the opposite, right? Most certainly do not create real-world violence.
The implication being that she belonged to him, that she was his possession. Once wronged, the hero must go get his possessions back, or at least exact a heavy price for their loss.
Yep, once again undermining women. If we do value them only as objects, then you are presenting the point that women are so stupid that they are actively agreeing to this system. There is a chance that my experiences are unique, but I think it's safe to say that once again, relationships are more than just having sex, so wrong again, buddy.
In this way, these failed hero stories are really about the perceived loss of masculinity, and then the quest to regain that masculinity, primarily by exerting dominance and control through the performance of violence on others.
Yes, that is what's happening. But again, it's more than that and not sexist. You almost make a coherent argument, just finish the line of logic. People can be multifaceted. They can be upset at the loss of masculinity while generally not appreciating the fact that their significant other is dead. You dick.
Consequently, violent revenge-based narratives repeated ad nauseum can also be harmful to men because they help to further limit the possible responses men are allowed to have when faced with death or tragedy.
Yep, and there we are. Men are so stupid we think video games are real. You know, just because I've played and liked hatred doesn't mean I want to destroy the world with my emo fury. And just because I've played and liked Trauma Center doesn't mean I think I'm a doctor. That line of logic is extremely retarded. Video games are escapism, and since most people don't go around shooting people in the face and then rubbing their balls on their face, I'm thinking Call of Duty isn't a factor in mass shootings.
To say that women could never die in stories would be absurd. But it's important to consider the ways that women's deaths are framed and examine how and why they're written.
Yet that is what you want. Unless you're saying that it can't be contextualized, caused by the villain, or caused by the main character, which leaves us with what exactly?
And To the Moon are a few indie games that investigate these themes in creative, innovative, and sometimes beautiful ways.
And point number 2, that they don't play video games. Now, if you haven't beaten To the Moon, you wouldn't know this, but using that as a positive game given the requirements that she has asked for is just funny. The moral of To the Moon is, bitches be crazy. And I'm not joking about that. So the ultimate conclusion is around finding out that the dude's mother accidentally ran over his twin brother, force-fed him drugs for years in order to make him forget his childhood, and then attempted and succeeded in forcing the twin brother's identity onto the child, which then fucked him up for the rest of his life. So apparently a non-sexist trope like the mercy killing is harmful to women everywhere because 0.21% of the murders done every day are done to a woman from a loved one, but something like the phrase, bitches be crazy is perfectly healthy for women. Got it. I'd love to call hypocrisy on this, but they just didn't play the game, so I can't really even be that mad. You go, girl. Manipulate that audience.
In most cases, the damseled characters have simply gone from being helpless to being dead, which is obviously not a huge improvement from her perspective.
It might be. There are things worse than death.
On the surface, the dude in distress and the damsel in distress may appear similar. However, they're not actually equivalent. To understand why they're different, we need to examine the broader historical and cultural implications of the two plot devices.
The reason it's sexist is because it's been around longer, and there are men still in power in the government, and men and men, men and men. Also, men can't be raped.
DLC quest.
You can't put DLC quest on the list. It's a satirical game. Do I really have to explain that to you? Yes, I know I have to explain that to her, so don't comment.
Players are meant to find all of this hilarious, of course, so the entire premise of this game is basically built around one big sexist fat joke.
Okay, I get how this is a fat joke, but you don't give a shit about women, so why would you care about fat people? How is this sexist? Again, replace this with a prince and watch the changes. If something actually changes, then it's sexist. But I'm sure nothing will because fat jokes are pretty sex neutral.
Sometimes this type of self-referential humor is referred to as ironic sexism. It's the I know that you know that I know this is sexist, wherein the underlying assumption on the part of media makers seems to be that as long as the sexism is overt, obvious, or over the top, then it somehow loses its cultural power and is suddenly no longer a problem.
Or it just might not be sexist.
But just because you could choose to play her, does not mean that this is then magically okay.
So you know the Mayans just butchered people all the time, right? Like they sacrifice people constantly. On top of the damsel in distress trope not being sexist, you are telling people that it's not okay to bring up historical facts, which I would call you fascist for, but that would require me to bring up historical facts to establish that you are acting that way, so I'm stuck in a catch-22.
A handful of other games attempt to get away with reproducing the damsel in distress by offering the ability to unlock and play as the damsel character.
I'm not going to let you call Super Meat Boy sexist. First, she has the hardest levels in the game, so no, you have not beaten the game without her. And second, this is the perfect example as why the damsel in distress trope is not sexist, and how not allowing context or having only specific context is harmful and limiting to humanity as a whole and to freedom of expression. So, Super Meat Boy on a conceptual level is about Edmund desperately emphatically needing his wife, to such an extent that contact with anything without his wife protecting him would be lethal to him. Now, I'm not sure how deep this metaphor goes, but at the very least we know it's a love letter to his wife. He doesn't want his wife. He doesn't like his wife. He needs his wife. And I think this game does visually communicate the concept that people in actual relationship develop bonds that are not superficial. And Edmund, of all people, does not objectify his wife. Now, you could add that he sure does have a sick sense of humor about it, which I would agree to, but so does so many other people, and remember, video games do not cause real-life violence, so if you find it tasteless, then don't consume it. It's not going to harm anyone.
So, the developers of Earthworm Jim noticed that sexist trend, thought it was hilarious, and proceeded to make another game in which a woman is completely unimportant. To add insult to injury, when Jim finally reaches Princess What's-Her-Name and is preparing to collect his reward, she is randomly killed by a falling cow.
They didn't think the trope was funny, they thought the inversion of the trope was funny. That's why they had the cow kill the woman, meaning it was the player's fault and subverted the expectations of the video game's ending that you probably didn't see coming. So no, it doesn't come at her expense, but the player's.
As we've established, the damsel in distress is part of a long tradition of mythological narratives dating back through the ages. But those historic roots are no excuse for the continued use of a trope that perpetuates regressive and patronizing myths about women.
What? That being kidnapped strips you of all agency? Hell, I'll say it one more time since the video's almost over. It's not sexist. So moving on to our last video for this part, we get the Miss Mel character spiel in which Anita attempts to argue that marketing towards a prevalent consumer group is sexist. There is a reason why Barbie isn't geared towards boys. It's not sexist that the Ken doll isn't the main character and just an accessory for the Barbie doll. So claiming that women were underrepresented in the early video game industry is rather incorrect because very few actually gamed. Now, if your argument was modern, you'd be very correct, but you'd rather hide this complaint in the notion that character design in the early days was much harder and restricted, so when they had to add female characters, they just slapped a bow on it because they were lazy and it's cheap. Let's find out what she has to say.
Luckily, Iwatani's regressive personal or cultural notions about women are not reflected in the finished game itself.
Oh, Anita, what little you know about Japan. That is the cultural norm there.
I describe the Ms. Male character trope as a female version of an already established or default male character. Ms. Male characters are defined primarily by their relationship to their male counterparts, via their visual properties, their narrative connection, or occasionally through promotional materials.
Now, this is a great point because it does show the superficial depth these characters hold, but just give it a minute and Anita will screw this up.
Now, the interesting thing is that these gendered signifiers are really quite arbitrary and abstract. There's nothing about a bow in and of itself that's intrinsically or essentially feminine. It's just a piece of colored fabric, after all. But our society currently assigns a very specific, socially constructed, and strictly enforced meaning to that piece of fabric.
Okay, I was with you until you said strictly enforced, because unless you're discussing the concept that in society, when a term or thing is being used by other people, it then becomes normalized. But that would be reinforcement and enforcement, which is fairly different, and it's not even remotely strict.
However, when designers choose to use the Ms. Male character trope and its associated visual stereotypes to specifically distinguish female characters from the rest of the cast in a fictional context, it has a few negative consequences.
And here we go.
One repercussion of constantly relying on feminizing signifiers for character design is that it tends to reinforce a strict binary form of gender expression. The gender binary is an entirely artificial and socially constructed division of male and female into two distinctly separate and opposing classes of human being. The gender binary also erases the continuum of gender presentations and identities that fall outside of the rigid masculine-feminine false dichotomy.
So a lot of things here. First, the original and correct usage of the term gender has nothing to do with sex. I will probably make a video about this later. And is, or at the very least, nothing more than a gradient between masculinity and femininity. You can carry on about false dichotomy all you want, but that was its literal purpose. Now, if you want to claim societal views on gender were incorrect, then have at it because they were. But let's not pretend that the forced labeling to such a fascist degree that the current incarnation of gender is imposing on people is somehow better. So we used to have sex, gender, aka whether you were masculine or feminine, or in the middle, you know, with the infinite gradient, and sexual orientation. Now we have gender. See how that confuses some shit? Josh, I'm a transgender woman, but I'm still attracted to women. Fuck you! And second, claiming the distinction between masculine and feminine is classist, and therefore you're alluding to it being sexist, is completely retarded. Ignoring that estrogen and testosterone are very real things, you're saying because we can quantify and document the differences between male and females, men are going to automatically devalue women. That is not logical. And then you pull the fallacy of all fallacies out of nowhere and claim the very specific examples you're presenting universally apply to everything is either stupid or profoundly misguided. Ignoring the fact that she has hoop earrings on and the very same makeup she claims as gender identifiers, why don't all females in all media look the same? The reason you only bring up the Miss Male concept in video games and comics is because until fairly recently, they were male-dominated mediums. Meaning the reason the Miss Male concept exists is not because of a binary dichotomy, but in fact a monary dichotomy. You'd know this if you talked about anything other than trying to claim these tropes are sexist because the gamers are male, the developers are male, the publishers are male, everyone is male. Mono meaning one, and sex, not that stupid-ass term that means everything and therefore means nothing.
When female characters are marked by obligatory stereotypical identifiers, it actively limits the range of available options by enforcing a narrow, restrictive, and monolithic model for the portrayal of femininity.
Now, see, I think that might be sexist. The claim that just because you wear a dress and makeup means that you are limited in how you are or how you can act doesn't sit well with me at all. What she's insinuating is that what you wear defines who you are no matter who you might be. Are you a tough and rough cowgirl who spends her days picking up heavy things? Guess what? That doesn't matter now because you're a prissy little thing because you put on a dress for whatever reason. This not only strips away any identity a human might have, but then robs them of any agency. But it also enforces the notion that clothes and colors must have this cultural identification to it that she is attempting to argue against. But what's worse is the idea that a woman has to act a specific way when she wears things like this, and that's retarded. A woman in makeup and a dress can swear like a sailor, spit in a dude's face and punch him in the dick because clothes are superficial. What do you think the real world is? Sailor Moon? And my favorite point is that if the developers are going to be so lazy as to use things like this, then it's because they do not care about building a character, so it's about conveying a message as quickly as possible. every time you bring up a point about sexism, it can be countered with, or they're just lazy.
But if a bow, lipstick, eyeshadow, or heels are placed on an otherwise male-identified character, the intention, or at least the result, is typically a homophobic or transphobic joke.
I get your point, but the example you went with was a dude who thinks he's attractive being the same as a gay person or transsexual person. I don't know what bigotry this is, but at most, he's a transvestite, which means he's probably a straight masculine male. Not sure what you're grasping at with that clip.
Maxwell is the hero of the popular Scribblenauts series. In the fourth game, Scribblenauts Unlimited, we're introduced to his twin sister Lily, who's basically a feminized copy of Maxwell. The two are identical except for a series of gendered signifiers designed to mark her as female.
What signifiers? She has no makeup, no jewelry, no high heels, only pigtails and a skirt, and everyone looks exactly like everyone else in Scribblenauts. How can you write this, say this, and then edit this without noticing that flaw? I haven't even played that game, and I can clearly see that.
The message is clear. Boys are the norm, girls the variation. Boys are central, girls peripheral. Boys are individuals, girls types. Boys define the group, its story, and its code of values. Girls exist only in relation to boys.
Again in male-dominated media. With this mentality, it would be perfectly okay for me to claim that something like the early My Little Pony, Barbie, and other cartoons aimed at girls are sexist as well. Because in those shows, the girls are the norm, boys are the peripheral. Girls are the individuals, boys are the types. Girls define the group, its story, its code of values. Boys exist only in relation to girls. Do you see how fucking easy that can be flipped? What makes this worse outside of this being you profiting off of female victimhood and demeaning women's rights movements everywhere? This is some selfish shit. The Smurfette principle, or Smurf principle if you allow me to be a smug asshole for a bit, is women looking at something designed and marketed specifically for boys, wondering why there aren't more girls in it and why they don't play a more important role in the narrative, and then complaining that something that was not designed for them doesn't cater towards their interests. It's unbelievable how self-centered and obnoxious you have to be to say shit like this. I'm sorry everything in the entire world doesn't have a perfect balance between males and females. Get the fuck over it.
Dixie Kong is the female variant and love interest of Diddy Kong. Note the ponytail and hair ringlets, pink shirt, pink hat, earrings, and eyelashes, all to distinguish her from her predecessor.
So, Dix, what do you say we skip the action-adventure platforming and get it on like Diddy Kong?
You do know we're, related, right?
That's even better!
If by love interest you mean incest, then yes, she is. Point number 3, that they don't play video games. I know this is a slight error, so it's nothing big, but really this just shows how unprofessional the show is when you can't even proofread your own script.
Ms. Male characters typically aren't given their own distinctive identities and are prevented from being fully realized characters who exist on their own terms.
Shows how on screen and in what manner she is unique, while saying that she is not unique.
In a male-identified society like ours, men are associated and become synonymous with human beings in general. In other words, male tends to be seen as the default for the entire species.
Ha! Yeah, say that to anyone who has a brain in their head that knows that half the planet is filled with women. Again, you are generalizing hard. Nearly all characters in video games are male, therefore all people everywhere are male.
Over in the Mushroom Kingdom, we have Toadette, who is both a Ms. Male character and the only woman among the mushroom people.
Point number 4, not being a gamer. There are many, and I do mean many, female toadstools in the Mario universe. But nice try with the fallacy.
That is how BioWare is selling the Mass Effect experience. Nearly everything about the advertising campaign explicitly tells players that Commander Shepard is a man, and by extension associates the official storyline with the male version of the hero. This marketing strategy contributes to the fact that only 18 to 20% of players choose the female option, despite the fact that Jennifer Hale's voice acting is widely praised as being far superior.
Maybe, just maybe, the reason they spend their money on advertising the male Shepard is because most people play the male Shepard. But I would also claim expecting a company to spend millions of dollars just so you can feel included in the marketing campaign for a video game is aggressively petty, and petty is not a strong enough word. And no, I think the fact that most people choose the male Shepard is because the person playing the game is male. That may or may not seem surprising to you, but many males do not want to play as females, so when they get the choice to pick, they do not. But no, claim sexism and slut-shaming and fat-shaming and racism based on the fact that Mass Effect's marketing campaign is focused on the male version of Shepard. So with that being finished, let's talk about what we just watched. After rewatching the first 4 episodes, I have to assume that Anita and Jonathan do not care about women's representation in gaming, as they frequently lie about things in order to present a worldview that justifies their victim blaming. Present facts in ways that doesn't represent the actual context that they should bring with them, and they don't even play video games. This is even further evident when there are plenty of legitimate sexist things that can be easily brought up, and several other points that could have aided in their points. The disparity between females in the AAA industry and in the independent scene does show that women are at the very least perceived as less valuable than men based solely on their sex. The fact that Peach in the comics was far more commanding and had significant more agency, and if I'm remembering correctly, the people did like those comics, and not even once bringing up Samus. But that doesn't matter because we will be taking a break from Miss Anita to go back to actually talking about video games, and we will return with the rest of Season 1 Feminist Frequency in a short enough time.
More than just this. So baby, if you are not ready for my kiss, then you can wear my sweatshirt, and you can tell your friends we'll be together till the end.